Okay, we're now at our participation numbers that we were expecting. So I would like to get everybody ready to get kicked off. Thank you so much for joining us at this evening's evening training course put on by Southern Tier Central. That's the regional planning board here in Corning, New York, that serves Steuben, Schuyler, and Chemung counties. Today, we have an opportunity to hear from Troy Thiel, who is the CEO of the Thiel team within First Weber, a Berkshire Hathaway affiliate in Madison, Wisconsin. He provides assistance to work strategically with individuals, organizations, and elected officials in his locality, the state, and at the national level. He was featured on a radio show, and I got to see a video of that. It was very good. I hope that he'll be able to share some insights with us today about his work across the nation, particularly with, I think we're going to hear more about how areas with development potential are able to utilize that money and direct it towards the right kinds of housing. And we're then going to hear a little bit between myself and Michael about the regional housing study that occurred in our community. So with that, I'd like to pass it off to Troy and say thank you to him for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you, Victoria. I hope you guys can hear me. That's my dog barking in the background. Jasper, he's a pup. One of the things that as part of the setup for today's conversation was about, the state of the market. There was a little bit of information for that. And if you heard Victoria and I catching up before this a few minutes ago, every morning I get up really early and read trade newspapers across the country, trade e-newsletters, whether it's McKinsey Report, BizNow, the Sightline Institute out of Portland, Oregon, Inman, and National Association of Realtors. And so I was to give you a little snippet of things I woke up to today, the October 22 home sales report in Wisconsin. We go down, it's not good news. It's if you're in the real estate market, or if you're a lender, it's just been very difficult. Once rates started rising, things got interesting. So in Wisconsin, we're seeing some pullback. We'll be down about 20% of the transactions. Now, we are an affordable state. This is today's Inman report. How much has rent risen? Because I watch rental patterns as well. Because to me, housing is one ecosystem. So this is the new news. But check this out. If I go down a little further, there's a nice graph here that shows you how much more people are paying in a 7-year period, how much more they have to work. 43 hours in March of 2015 to pay the average American pay the typical U.S. rent. And now it's 55 hours. That's an increase of a lot. So rental is a challenge. Pending home sales. This is another post. Did this happen? I think I got this today. Pending home sales post record drop as deals die and price cuts soar. Seeing major significant price reduction activity in most major markets. We're seeing national builders. Lennar Homes, which is a national builder in 30 different states, is active. I'm active with an account here. They didn't listen to me last year, and they sort of wish they did. They overpriced their initial process. They've dropped prices 25% on their product in my Madison market. They should have listened to me. And then it goes on and on. I could read this stuff all day. Here's Seattle's home areas linger on the market as higher rates buyer power. I still work in the Seattle market as a developer and a development consultant, and I'm also a speaker with the National Association of Realtors on occasion and state boards as well. There's just pretty much bad news all over in real estate. Here's Seattle landlords operated a cartel to hike rents, lawsuit claims. If you're not paying attention, there's a lot of trends that are talking about major challenges, not only with home ownership, but with rents. This is an interesting one. In Vail, housing shortage threatens America's ski wonderland. In some of the tertiary second or resort markets, the real problem has been workforce housing, and you may be seeing that in your space as well. Here's November 18th. U.S. home sales fell in October for a 9th straight month. So it's been challenging, hasn't it? I'll get to my PowerPoint. And I'll share that. That's me. And I want to say thank you to Michael and Andrews, I believe, on the call from Place Dynamics in Victoria. We've had several good conversations about how I can bring value to you today. And definitely want to open up the conversation. Michael and I met through the Wisconsin Downtown Action Council Board about 14 or 15 years ago, Michael, I think, somewhere back in there. At the time, I was the chair of the City of Madison's downtown committee, very active in the Economic Development Committee. I've been active in housing, not only in Madison, but in the Chicago market before this, as well as the Seattle market, and then nationally. Here's a little bit about our bio. I believe, Victoria, you're sharing this PDF, right, with everyone? That's on the call. So you don't need to read about me, blah, 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 blah. That's my wife, Karen. She's really great. I do have 2 agents here in the Madison market that also work as part of our team. And then I have 2 agents in the Milwaukee market that I work with. I've been very involved throughout my career in successful condo development, condo conversions, some subdivision, a lot of urban row home product as well. And I've been involved with 3 different major projects that have won the Congress for New Urbanism Project of the Year. I'm the only person in their history that has won 3 awards. And the first lead neighborhood development in the nation, Uptown Normal, was the study of my honors master's thesis back in the day. So I've been an appropriate development of sustainability, and land use to me is sustainability. So I've been a fanatic about that for a long, long time. And I'm very passionate about housing and the American dream of home ownership. It's really key and critical. I was raised in a lower middle class household. And when my parents retired, most of their wealth was the equity that they had, and they didn't have a high-end home. In America, 70% of household wealth at retirement of a household is not Bitcoin. Don't listen to Matt Damon. And if you listen to him on Super Bowl Sunday, you've got a lot less money. It's household wealth through home ownership equity. It is a true key thing. The average wealth of a homeowner is 40 times that of a rental home ownership, and this is what drives me in my passion for home ownership. The next slide is, what are we doing wrong? This is the first slide of the presentation, and this is just a little snippet. It starts in the quarter of 2006, where you see the red and the blue line, and then you see that up until now. And the blue line is apartments, and the red line or orange line, depending on your screen, is condominiums. And in 2006, right as the kind of the boom started to wane, and we actually saw several markets drop earlier than this. The Chicago market started going negative in housing development in 2002, 2003. I was there then. There was too much in the pipeline in terms of condos, but nationwide, 2006 is sort of seen as the year where the downturn began. And you can watch the movie and The Big Short and all kinds of other reasons, but you can see that there was an adaptation from 2006 on. By 2010, rentals became the large build. And you can see how much rental has been built recently. It's huge numbers. We have set the number. There's over 800,000 rental units at nationwide apartments that are coming online in 2022. 800,000. You keep hearing things that we have a labor shortage. Look at the screen. We don't have a labor shortage. It's about that hashtag. We have a mix problem, and that is affecting our housing values. It's elevating home ownership values. At the same time, it's increasing demand within the rental space when there's been a lot of new high-paying jobs in the major markets and even in the tertiary markets, and it's raising rents. So a generation ago, the average household in America spent 16% of their income on housing costs. It is now projected that it's going to be 32% at the end of this year, a doubling in a generation. Oh, by the way, the difference between now and a generation ago is the number of households that had single income. It was significantly more than it is now. So now we have double incomes paying even more. And in many cases, we know a lot of people that have second and third jobs to make ends meet. This screen looks very similar if you look at household, and Michael's study talks about this, is the number of essentially homes that have been built that are in that missing middle workforce housing, a more affordable price point. We've seen a significant drop in that. So I mentioned the missing middle, which is a marketing term used by the Optics Design Group, but this is essentially fixing the mix. This is the type of the housing, and I see this in your housing analysis, previous studies, and in Michael's and Andrew's studies, is we have this gap of the type of housing that in America, that previous slide that I just showed you about condos versus apartments, we now have significant problems. You can no longer build in most communities 4 units, 2 to 4 units. They were zoned out of existence. It's very difficult to get zoning approvals for townhomes, for cottage housing, for triplex or vertical stacked homes. A lot of our major cities, a lot of your cities, a lot of our smaller towns are a mixture of smaller homes to larger homes and a mixture of apartments to smaller 2 to 4 units. And we stopped building that missing middle in America. So we need to pay attention to what worked back in the day and maybe reincorporate that into our thoughts. One of the major issues, and I with the slide with condos versus apartments, I'm a big fan of not only condo development for new construction, but also condo conversions, because what happened in that early slide in 2006, 2007, I'll go back to it, developers started seeing the market change, and they had smart consultants like me saying, hey, in your market, you need to stop building so many condos because there's too much in the pipeline, and a lot of them will turn into apartments. A lot of them did turn into apartments. So in that 2006, 2007, 2008, condos that were in the pipeline, of the ones that were built, a bunch of them turned into apartments in places like Chicago and major cities because the demand curve shifted. And so they were built to condo quality. And so a lot of the apartments that have been built since that last major downturn were built to condo quality. So one of the things, if you do condo conversions right, and I was involved with a couple dozen of them in Chicago and in Milwaukee and in Madison, your pre-sales, we turn a lot of renters into homeowners because you give existing tenants the home ownership right of first refusal to buy a unit within their building. I had 6 flats in the Andersonville neighborhood in Chicago where literally every tenant bought their unit. We didn't ever have to go to the market. We instantly turned people into homeowners, which is really cool. That's the goal. Lower price base is key to providing the affordability because new construction is expensive, land costs, now loan costs being double what they were. These are base, so their base prices, the build cost were year 2000, 1990, 1980, 2010, the build costs were significantly less. So in order to get the development to pencil out for the developers or the landowners or the property owners, those early build costs, and the fact that they've made money and depreciated the heck out of the product means that there's a major plus side if they decided to sell and if the market is right for it. I believe in many markets there is a strong demand for more affordable condo units. It's a more sustainable offering. It's already built. The greenest house that you can buy is one that's already built. It's faster to fix the market. You don't have to worry about the land deals and the 2 to 3 years of city approvals. In some cases, Madison, 5 years for condos right now. That's way too long. It's faster to fix our market. So, and it's better locations. These are A or B plus locations. They've already been grabbed. They've already been built. And so the no NIMBY issues, it's the same land use. It's just changing the form from renters to homeowners. And so I'm a big fan of that being one of the major fixes that people really need to consider. So what are our top fixes? I'll get into this. Condominiums and conversions. The reason condominiums is the new construction ones, when you have an asset that costs you $200 a foot to build and you're building 1,000 square feet, you can design a really beautiful 2-bedroom in 1,000 square feet. That's $200,000 for build cost, and you can sell for $3.25 to $400. These missing gaps in a lot of major metro markets, up to $500 or $600 in different sizes. The smaller the units, the more affordable they're going to be, and that's pretty cool. The conversions I hit on, other market types, and I'll show you some photos of that. And you have examples in your area. Is the row homes, and I'm a big fan of the senior housing for home ownership because we old people, I'm not quite, I guess I'm a senior. I get Art magazine. Anyway, we don't need the big house anymore. And a lot of us, if you played basketball like me for 50 plus years, you might need single level living. So because your knees are bad. The next kind of top fixes is mixed use projects with apartment and ownership mix. And I'll hit on one of those. One of the projects we did here, it's about 3 blocks from my house that I'm speaking from. And that's another great tool because we'll get into that. And then the missing missing middle, which I just talked about, the 2 to 4 units, rezoning 2 to 4 units. And there are some cities that have done that right. Cottages, I'm going to touch on cottage housing and some more missing middle development. Again, prioritizing home ownership units, because what's happening is because there is very little development for buy down old buyers like us, the next paragraph, we are not getting out of our homes. We're not getting out of our half empty, 3/4 empty homes because for a while, until this year, they've been appreciating in some markets, 10%, 15%, 20% market appreciation in places like Seattle, which have actually reversed course. The home you bought in March in Seattle is now 20% less than what you paid for it in Seattle right now and in the metro area. Those days are done, so that because us old folks are used to, we understand that 70% equity in home ownership is really key to our fiscal stability and our fiscal wealth and our positioning. So we are very unlikely. Only 10% of people, the NAR did a survey. Only 10% of people who own a home would be interested in selling their house and then renting. They want to buy. So a lot of places, and maybe it's happening in your market. I don't know your market as well as I know others. In Seattle, the people were selling their Seattle houses and they were buying out in the tertiary markets, the Lake Chelan Mansons, the Wenatchees, the Bellinghams, the really cool neighborhoods that are cities that are an hour or two from Seattle where they can get back and forth and touch their people, but they can buy a house in Bellingham for less than half of what it is in Kirkland and downsize. The problem is all of that money, that outflow money to those tertiary markets are people that are very wealthy compared to those tertiary markets. So we started pricing out the locals in Bellingham. We started creating housing dynamic issues in these areas, and Chelan as well, and other places. And this is happening across the country. This is not just specific to those towns. And so we need to solve that buy down buyers goal. Also, a lot of the first time buyers through surveys don't want a big house. They don't want the classic 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 3-car garage. They want something in an urban location, a walkable location, a sustainable location where they can shut the door, walk away, and have low maintenance. So condos actually answer that. And for older folks, that's another important thing. And then upzoning, I'm going to hit on that. Commercial and more zoning changes to get higher density and residential in some of the zones that have been traditionally been commercial only or industrial only, so I'll hit on that. I am a part of a group called the Community for Affordable Housing in Washington State. And we have every year, we have the 12 days of housing solutions and we have events. Number one, and you heard me talk condo. This is fixing the condo liability and consumer protection and condo conversion law improvements. That's still number one on our list because Washington State and many states have this weird liability with condo developers that the apartments don't have or single family home developers don't have that are very deleterious in places like Washington State and Minnesota. These condo liability laws were written by, guess what? A special interest group called the Apartment Investment Industrial Complex. They literally sold the state legislators or bought the state legislators, if you're into nefarious politics, and they sold them that, they need a higher standard, but that's so high that no one will want to do condos. And so then the apartment owners don't have the competition, that orange blue line. That's part of it. I'm not a big fan of that. I've hit on another one previously, the upzoning and rezoning we've talked about. That's a major key issue. This is an example. This site, Sequoia Commons, is in Madison, and it was commercial retail zoning. And it was a site of a 35,000 square foot building that had a library, an old little mini grocery store with pharmacy for the neighborhood, and a few other spaces, our vacuum cleaner shop and La Brioche bakery was there. We were in Madison, we started rezoning commercial to allow residential. And now it's 45 condos above the Madison Public Library there, and then 90 apartments in phase 2, and both of those apartments and the condos are above 80,000 total square footage of the commercial and the library space. That library, this is a fairly low density neighborhood. And I say this because it's 3 blocks from where I'm at. But that library is the 4th busiest library in the entire state of Wisconsin, because it's a net zero, it's tied to a solar grid down the way. There's a great coffee house I just came from. That's why I'm talking fast. I'm also from Chicago. It's really a great mixed use project. And for the developers, which is the Kelly family, if you're a golfer fan, Jerry Kelly, he's now a senior golfer pro, is one of the family members that we worked with. They kept ownership of those 90 apartments, and they kept ownership of all of that retail. Those are condos in the condo building, the 45 unit building. And then they still have the ownership. So they're still in that, they still got that extended income earning. And we sold off the 45 condos. I was on the team and helped design, obviously, the condos and the layout. One of my neighbors was a guy named Russell Wilson while he was playing football here at Washington State or at Wisconsin for a year. He's in Denver. They don't like him as much as they thought they were going to.
I want to interject one thing here too. The library itself is a bit of an incentive because the developer going into the project knew that a portion of the space was committed.
Exactly. Yeah. We had over half of the units reserved before we ever broke ground. Russ Feingold, our U.S. Senator, was one of our original buyers, and his sister Nancy and her husband Doug, who I just had coffee with yesterday. Of the 45 original buyers, including my wife and I, we bought a unit. 22 of the 45 lived within 6 blocks of the project. We sold our big houses to move to this.
If I may.
Yeah.
This area, I believe it has a lot of snowfall, right? So snowfall?
Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly marketing this to people who are on the older side in snowfall rich communities like our own. How is snow maintenance on a facility like this handled? And do you find that it's suitable to keep people moving around during the winter?
Yes, my wife bemoans we no longer live here. We have a house because we moved to Seattle after we had the condo and we had a country house. Heated garages, a big common heated garage space, plenty of bike parking, and the snow was removed. It's a common element. So there were snow removal contractors, which I did as a kid. I made a lot of money doing it. It was fun. We get about 110 inches of snow a year. Not like Buffalo got that last week. But yeah, definitely. And so the maintenance issues are in the condo assessments. I just sold, you can, in the center above the green Subaru, the windows to the right, I just sold the second floor unit. It was my friend Andy, who was our post lieutenant. He's retired. He sold his house and bought a unit in there, 1 bedroom and den for 910 square feet for $265. So we get a lot of, the average market time on this project is 2 days. 2 days is the average market time in the last 2 years. 2 days. Average sale price to list price ratio is 108%. That shows you the demand that these units have.
Is this adjacent to transportation networks, and how far is it from maybe healthcare facilities? Yeah,
so I mentioned TOD there at the bottom. There is a bus stop literally right outside both main streets. And there are 2 bus lines on Midvale, and then there are 2 bus lines on Tokay. So our area is kind of an adjunct area where a lot of University of Wisconsin people live, or people working downtown. So the routes are right to the hospital campus, where there's the University of Wisconsin hospital, there's the Veterans Hospital, there's the Children's Hospital. It's perfectly set up. And then and Michael knows this, within 2 blocks there's some great parks, and then another block over is our Southwest Bike Path, which is the highest volume bike path in the state for commuters by far. There's over 2,500 people a day that commute on that one bike path.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's really a good location that way.
These are also the kind of units that somebody who is moving to the area to take a job with one of the larger companies, somebody in a technical or managerial kind of position, is going to be very interested in these kinds of units.
Yeah, it's kind of, piggybacking on that. If you see the upper left photo, do you see how large those terraces are? Our 1 bedroom with den had a 350 square foot terrace. People have outdoor space, so when they're leaving their house, so we did hydroponic outdoor gardening. And the person who bought our unit was a landscape professor from New York University, who went to Wisconsin and always wanted to move back to Madison after he retired. And then if you look above, either the upper left or the upper right corner, do you see the pop up of the roof line? Those are 14-foot ceiling heights in the living rooms. in the great room. So on the top floor, this has accents that, wow, that's really, really cool. The planning director for the city of Racine, Carl Grapentine. Do you know him, Michael? Chuck Rapentine. He retired. He bought one of our units. He bought the unit that faces, you can see Lake Monona from. And so those are beautiful units. So it's a quality building that people were very excited about hitting the market. Upzoning.
Did you see the question? Did these units have elevators?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a common elevator. There's two sets. There's two of them. They go from the basement to all levels, but not specific just to one unit. Yeah. Is that the one question I found in the chat? Okay, cool. Yeah. So definitely elevators. Really large storage rooms too. And again, heated parking was a major plus. We did bike hanging and we did bike racks. And then my storage unit was so large, I was able to hang 3 bikes in it as well. New housing options. So this slide we're looking at is upzoning in Seattle. There's 2 upzone movements. One was the RSL, the residential small lot zone upgrade, and you can see that. And so if you look at the images here, you can see that if you do some land accumulation, if you do 2 lots, you can build even a small condo project. You can build row homes. You can build 2 homes on one block. They allow for short lot splitting. So you essentially have a fee simple condo ownership with 2 homes. We bought one in Wedgwood neighborhood and sold it. It was 850 square feet. When we sold it, we made a lot of money on it. This is a great project. And if you see the lower right image of that picture, it was all based upon the bungalows and cottages of the time, of the period 100 years before that. That's Capitol Hill, Michael. That's an existing thing. And that's land use that people are used to. And it increases sensibly density on each project, on each site. Because people get afraid of having big towers over their neighborhoods. And this is adding 2 or 3 or 4 people a block. Big deal, right? And stuff. So there we go. So back to this is an example of something similar that was a little more suburban usage. Cottagecompany.com. You can go to that and look at their projects and their portfolio. They essentially took the Sears and Roebuck bungalow and blew it up in some cases. And they have a mixed price element where they took larger lots when you get into the east or the north of the parts of the Seattle metro market, there were 5-acre lots where they've put 17, 18, 19 homes on where there was 1. And different price points, smaller bungalows, from smaller bungalows all the way up to more classical, almost Victorians that were 3,000 square feet. And so there was a mix of price. As you can tell, landscaping is a big deal. I mean, beautiful. And they set up the bottom left photo. They set up these beautiful little courtyards. They built around courtyards, so it's a walk-in community. The parking element, you can see that if you go to their website. The parking element is outside. There's no attached garages to any of these. It's Seattle. People they walk into their place. Have an umbrella ready, or Seattleites don't use umbrellas. They just wear a lot of REI equipment. And also too, they have communal meeting spaces in some of their projects, and they have a communal guest house in some of their spaces. So if you have one of those little bungalows and the family's coming over for Thanksgiving, you can rent that, or they short-term Airbnb it, and it goes into the common element kitty for maintenance. This is a very successful model that will work anywhere. The next place where it worked is in Portland. I've got 2 projects here. The upper left, the gray, those are duplex townhomes. That's called the Going Street Commons. And there are 22 total units, 11 units into 2, and they're prefab modular. They were designed by Phoenix House out of Colorado, and then built by a local factory in Oregon. Near Portland, so the transport time was less. And those sold out in 1 month, 22 units at an average price of $675,000. And they range anywhere from 150 or 1,500 square feet to 2,000 square feet. The really cool project to me, it's even cooler because it's infill. This is the Tillamook Row, the white with the wood accents. In that center photos, that's actually the common meeting room on the lower level, and then a guest unit that they rent out. They either short-term rent it, and that's in the Northeast in a very busy neighborhood, very TOD. There are 17 units of housing. You can see the solar on them. It's a net zero project. It's in a great location. The walkability score is 96. There's 17 units where there used to be 3 houses. They took out 3 standard houses and put 17 units of housing in. These are gorgeous projects, and Stephen Aguilar, the president of Green Hammer, he wants to work with me in the Midwest, and I want to work with him because he does great stuff. So I'm looking to find a partner for him to work with. So more rezoning. If you see the big plat image at the bottom left, this is the Lakeshore Commons project in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Michael, have you been by this yet? So very cool. That's 700 units of housing where there was a industrial concrete plant and a bunch of empty land, and it's mixed price point. It's mixed ownership. Of the 700 units, the 520 are home ownership units, and then 180 apartments. And if you look at the upper left, the Juniper 2, for example, so you can go to this website and go to resources and look at the team, and then you can start to see much. That Juniper 2 is selling for $420 a foot, and it's costing the builder $180 because those are mod units. Those are modular units that are trucked to it. So once the model got developed, I mean, that's really good math if you're the developer. They reserved 40 homes in a week. In the first week. So there's a lot, and then they have the common elements. You can see it's the pool. I mean, it is Wisconsin. You can see in the image below where the plat is, there's a park. Our friend Ed Freer did that park, Michael. And that's Lake Michigan. You know, you walk over, you've got this beautiful nature. This is a suburban location. This is not really walkable to any retail or center core city. This is a bit of a drivable location, except the Oak Leaf bike trail is on it. And that's if you're riding fast, that's about an hour ride to get into downtown Milwaukee from there. So that's a pretty cool project. I think it's a great template because I'm a big fan of prefab modular is one of our things. Victoria had shared with me that the Reading and Builders might have been on this call. This is just 2 examples of things that have been built in your neighborhood that are like really good examples of that missing middle. The urban row home project to the left, that's really cool. Just like Michael said, you know, someone coming from Boston, they see one of these and this is them, right? If they're urban dwellers. The blue cottage housing can be built as a single family ranch, single level, or duplexes for seniors who are buy down buyers. I really like, that. I'm not sure I like that color much. Style is personal, but I love the texture of it, and I love the texture of the row homes. And these things can be built in so many different ways as well. I mentioned it, rezoning. And has anyone seen this book yet or read it? Get this book. M. Nolan was at my conference in Milwaukee last week. He's a fantastic speaker. Victoria, you might want to watch a video of him presenting. He's a great presenter. This book is worth of everybody sitting down and having a study session, because he not only does he study about how the zoning broke the American city and how we rezoned out the American cities that we see that are historic, but he offers ways to fix it. And then I'm helping him try to find his next, what did he say? His next dragons to go after. And, I'm talking about housing construction types. Another major thing is, multifamily tax exemptions and density incentives. And I'll explain a little bit about a success story in Seattle. But boy, I don't know if it's happening in your area, but in my area, all of the tax exemptions are going to the apartment developers. None are going to homeowners. And it's actually creating this imbalance still. Let's rethink that. Let's prioritize home ownership projects at the permitting desk, at city assistance desk, and let's increase density where it's important in irrational ways. Major cities that have led the charge, Seattle, Minneapolis has done a really great job at increasing density in transit-oriented districts. We are in the process in Madison of doing a TOD overlay district where we're increasing density within 500 or within half a mile of our BRT line that's coming in. And it's already making major numbers increases. This is an example of two different of those strategies. I mentioned transit-oriented development overlays, and again, this is City of Seattle, so you can see mixed use things I've already talked about, the affordable housing, compact development, neighborhood centers. It's really working in Seattle, except for the condo liability makes it so onerous for condo developers. They can't get insurance. It's years to get a permit still because of these weird things. So they're building apartments. And I love apartments if they're done nice, but we've got to have a better mix. So the Seattle MHA, there are 57 districts that were upzoned, 50 major districts. The Roosevelt neighborhood is unrecognizable in Seattle. Their transit-oriented development, Seattle has had light rail installed. It's not completely done. It's had delays with COVID and other things. But it's working to increase housing units. Are they the right kind of units? I have a 45 unit project of condos and a 45 unit of apartments at a TOD in Columbia City we're working on. Other fixes, we hear a lot about accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units, and then I mentioned prefab modular. Leading state in ADU fixes is California. This is Sightline Institute, sightline.org. Go there, and if you just type in ADU, you'll see 50, 60 great stories about how to do accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units, rewrites the zoning correctly. And Dan and the team at Sightline are fantastic. That is a story from back in 2018 about how great when California in 2016 and into 2017 made the changes, they saw an increase of, you can't see it here. Oh, there it is. Yes, in the second paragraph. 2 years later, building permits for ADUs in Los Angeles have surged by a factor of 30 times as many units, 3,000%. So pay attention to this. Accessory dwelling units can also be great fixes. If you want to age in place, it can be a great example of, I own a home, I can build a nice ADU. Why don't I just build that ADU and move into that and sell off my front house and turn it into a condo? I mean, really great ways to keep people. When I hear the phrase aging in place, it also means aging in community, right? So you can walk to your coffee houses and your third places. Prefab modular, I showed the example with the Lakeshore Commons project. Here are two multifamily projects. The photo at the upper left, this is through wisemodular.com. These are great guys. Christian, the developer, is the smartest person I've ever met. That's a 7-story project in downtown St. Paul, Minnesota, which is where the state capitol is up the slope behind there. And then he did a nice project in that's in Uptown on the right, and he's done about 9 projects. His problem now is he's out of manufacturers. There are no factories. He can't start another project because as soon as he'll get product is summer of 24. Wink, wink. We need more factories building that because the demand is starting to explode. Offsitedirt.com is my colleague Audrey Grubesic's collect all for the movement of this. So if you're interested in prefab modular and want to watch, stories about how to do it right or conversations, go there. She is an industry leader in that sense. This is a no-brainer. Time is money. We need quicker, more predictable approval processes, whether it's form-based zoning, or if you are coming in with a sustainable project or a good density project or a home ownership project, you should get moved to the head of the line. Because we need it so much. So pay attention to that. I don't know if you all are doing any excess public or nonprofit land redevelopment, but this is a great tool. I'll use Bellevue, Washington as an example. The median house of Bellevue, Washington is $2.5 million. That's the median house. Some guy named Gates lives there and all these other folks. They drive up the prices. Churches are turning excess land into multifamily affordable housing units. It's really a key thing. In Madison, we have a public site where there's a project for a public market that isn't going to make it. So we're now combining that use with our new Amtrak station, the public market, and then an air rights affordable housing project directly above it. So this is a great source of getting some of those projects done. And most of all, we need political will and do. raise your hand. I can't see everybody. Raise your hand if any elected official made housing solutions part of their platform. I can't raise my hand. That's wrong. I mean, this, for some reason, this is a major crisis. The projections in the US is that we will sell 4.4 million homes in 2023 because the market has shifted so much in interest rates. Last year, we sold 6.2 million. Every transaction puts $175,000 into the local economies, into tax bases. I didn't show a story. Seattle's budget has been blown because they're now getting $75 million less in tax receipts because their housing has dropped. Their home sales have dropped 45% this year. Now they've got to fix a budget. We've got to get political electeds. We've got to get industry associations interested in fixing housing and getting home ownership and fixing the mix. Again, other thoughts: expanding residential zoning to all commercial zones. Think about it. I would suggest RFPing a publicly controlled site or a district to get development, energy, and attention that leads to action. We did this. Michael knows. He saw the maturation of East Washington Avenue in downtown Madison, which has now got 7,900 units of housing. It was basically an industrial ghetto. I had something to do with that. Pursue a prefab factory and builder. I really think that's something to seriously consider here already. Making housing and increasing home ownership options a key issue for electeds, and within that, you can have policy charrettes, discussions. Do surveys. Have industry leaders in real estate saying, well, what does tomorrow's buyer want? Ask those questions. Get those people in the room. So I probably took too much time, but I'm ready to answer any questions if there are any questions. And I know Michael and Victoria want to talk about the housing analysis too.
Well, if nobody else has a question, I have several. First, a comment. You talked about people who develop an ADU for their own use in the rear of their property and then sell off the front. Our communities have been doing something like that for a long time, but it's creating a second house in the back of the land and then selling off the front. And for the most part, our communities came through. There was a time when the zoning laws were put into place to prevent flag lots, basically, because they would portion off the driveway and then have the back area. And so in that way, the zoning laws were able to reduce or limit the number of flag lots that could be developed. We're also putting in, some communities put in places a maximum number of driveways per linear distance across a road, again, limiting the number of flag lots that could be in place in the community. So they would have to identify that barrier and then decide to remove the barrier to allow that type of development if it was appropriate.
Yeah, well, I mean, do you want to increase, housing options or not? I mean, it's essentially the question. Flag lots are rural use, right? With easements for transit. Most of the flag lots in an RSL site oftentimes are just the sidewalk and the width required, right? And so that back house's parking element is out on the street. I've lived in neighborhoods of major cities, Boston and Chicago, where, I was lucky if I went out at night that if I got a parking spot within like 10 blocks of where I lived. But in most communities, I ask people to say when they, parking, of course, has driven development patterns and development laws, and that how's that working? Not so well sometimes. And I say, you have this parking element on the street that you're not using. In Kirkland, when we tried to remove the restriction of a parking spot for that back house, we said, look in the front of your neighbor. In our neighborhoods, there was nobody parking on the street. I said, we have paid for those parking spaces since they were paved 100 years ago to maintain them. We're not using them. I've even had people, we even had people in our little chat rooms in our neighborhoods. Oh, egad, someone is driving 6 blocks from their apartment and they're parking in the street and then they're getting on the bus to go to downtown Seattle. I'm like, so, right? I mean, that's an asset. I see when I see empty spaces in front of houses, I see an asset we're not using that we've paid for. So let's use it. So back to The California laws, as they allowed lot splitting and condos, small lot condos, they allowed the square footage to be up to 1,400 square feet. If you want to see some really cool ADUs or DADUs, go to Vancouver, BC, and their laneway home policy. It's amazing. There's like beautiful Frank Lloyd Wright sitting in alleys. It's really kind of cool to see. And I mean, do you want to fix housing or not? Do you want people to stay in their neighborhood or not? It's, I think it should be a political hot potato. I think elected should have to have a housing policy. And so when they were asking me for money this time around, I said, what are you doing for housing? I don't have a policy. Well, then I'm not interested in supporting it. Call me next time if you have a housing policy.
Are there any conflicts between compressed density that has walk-in access and then the needs for ambulance services for older individuals?
Well, I mean, if the sidewalk is wide enough, right, the ambulance can come from the street, right? And they have to.
But this hasn't been a concern for the developers. They
never. No.
EMTs do what they need to do.
Yeah, the biggest concern I oftentimes will hear is, can the fire trucks turn around? In 90% of the streets in America, they can't turn around. So why is it suddenly a thing, right?
Yeah. I think also when you talk about the cottage housing developments, I love them. I think it would be a wonderful place to, retire to when I get to a point where I don't want to take care of the yard and everything. These are just wonderful. But walk-in, well, a lot of these are really developed so that the vehicles travel around the edge. So yes, the front of the house is facing out onto this green space and all your neighbors, and it's nicely landscaped and everything. In the back, you may even have an attached garage. I've seen them with attached garages. That would be my preference. but that access lane is in back. And so you don't have a very large backyard. But again, I don't think at the point where you're buying something like this, you're really looking for that. I have seen them, they're very popular with seniors, but they're very popular with younger people as well, because it is a smaller home, a little bit easier to afford, low maintenance. And I thought it might be worth taking a minute just to talk a little bit about some of the things I thought might be relevant here out of the study, because the first thing I noted, looking back at prior studies, it seems that there are a lot of perceptions that we tested out because we had questions about them, and a lot of them don't hold very true. The first, well, there's a feeling that the market in the area is pretty expensive. It's not. We saw comments about, well, somebody can go into Dallas or Houston and get a house and it's so much. It's not. Places like Nashville, places like you're on a par with Oklahoma City. And we looked at some specific price ranges and said, what can you get in this price range in Denver, in Houston, in the different communities? And in most cases, you're actually able to get more home in your area at the same price point. The issue, of course, is where people are right, is those homes need repair, but those homes also need repair in those other communities. So we're comparing apples to apples. And again, your pricing is better.
Should I pull up the housing analysis?
No, I have it here if we need it, but I'm only going to talk for a minute or two.
Okay.
I think, one of the other issues that was rightly identified is you don't have a lot of selection. That is the big challenge. And you have some things going for you. The kind of person like me who would rather have something 5 miles out of town with a bit of woods around me and 5 acres, 10 acres. For me, you can find that in your area and it is dirt cheap. You can't get, if you go into Denver and you say, I want 5 acres, they're going to say, well, okay, you're looking at getting an hour and a half out of the metro area. And what you're going to get is a piece of flat farmland east of Denver. So that person who's coming to your area and finds that rural acreage appealing is going to find the acreage, but maybe not the house. And what do they do in that year when they're waiting for their home to be built? So again, that's a problem that ties into the rental market. We're just now starting to see some newer rentals being built because the demand is at either end of the scale. There's the need for low income housing, and there's need for high income rentals. And I run into this in every single community. The developers, the apartment developers have always kind of been at that, well, we want to stay mid-market. Well, there's this huge demand for the people who've been homeowners and who maybe just need a place to rent for a year while they're building their house, or maybe they have retired and they're snowbirds and they only want to spend part of the year, but they want the washing machine, the dishwasher, the granite countertops, a fireplace, all the amenities that they had in their house. Other issue that I see, we really didn't discuss in the housing so much, and maybe we didn't even touch it as much as we could have in some of the other areas, but we saw in your area and we see everywhere that the housing crisis around 2010 kind of decimated the construction sector. A lot of the small spec builders got out of the market, then are not necessarily going back in. They'll do a custom built home, but there's a lot fewer of the smaller people who will do a 5-10 unit subdivision on spec. Then you also have a loss of the construction workers. So that is the big crisis, and this preceded 2010 in rural areas. If you wanted to build in a rural area, you couldn't get the workers, and that's why you see so many double wides. the downside of or the less attractive style of modular housing, but that was very common in the rural areas because you simply didn't have the construction workers to build very easily. But after 2010, you lost a lot of those people. A lot of the general contractors and the specialty contractors, and the industry has been changing overall, so that you don't have the supply of workers, which modular, the better quality stuff that you're seeing is a nice fit. But of course, we lost a lot of those builders during that same time frame. A lot of the companies that were, I used to drive out from my home heading west, and I would pass Wick Homes. Well, Wick Homes is big, and they were selling homes. I toured their facility at one point in the 90s where they were building homes that they were shipping overseas. And then you get out to the Field of Dreams country in Iowa, and the big employer out there used to be another modular home builder. Well, they went out of business in that period of time. So kind of what Troy was talking about is finding the people to do the modular construction. That is a huge opportunity. We've worked with a couple communities where they have a large forestry industry and said, this is an opportunity for you to do some, business attraction. It might be here too. But aside from that, I thought I'd mention just a couple other places. So the idea of like the library, Madison's done this in a couple developments where they've used a library to anchor a redevelopment project and incentivize it in areas where they're trying to spur that kind of thing. But we've also seen businesses do that. And you have large employers who have difficulty attracting workers, and housing being an issue. If there were a condominium development and you had a hesitant condo developer, having that Corning or whoever it might be say, you know what, you're going to put up 40 condo units to 20 unit buildings. We're going to take 4 in phase 1 and 4 in phase 2. And we're going to keep those. We're going to make them available when we have people come here who are maybe on a 6-month assignment, or maybe they are that executive that they're really trying to recruit, and that person needs a place to live for a while, a year, whatever it may be, while they build. So they may be a player in trying to incentivize some of that condo development. We saw another example of a community we're working with right now has a foundry, and despite these being very good paying jobs, they cannot recruit locally. They're flying in people from a lot of them actually from Texas, where they were laid off in the oil fields. And they have 500 people they're bringing in as a contract workforce because they can't recruit locally. And housing is the issue. They've commandeered an entire hotel, but now they're going forward and they want to build housing so that they have apartment complexes that they own that they can make available for their employees, contract employees that they bring up. But those are all some approaches that you can be thinking of, because regardless of who you're talking about, if it's the entry level buyer, if it's the mid-market buyer, if it's the high-end buyer, seniors, families, single people, it's all interrelated. And the problem right now is there's so little inventory across the board that you need to change that scenario. You need to change that to bring in more housing development. And really some of the ideal opportunities to incent are things like the condo development. I'm also a big proponent of ownership as opposed to rental. The rental market tends to take care of itself pretty well. Again, there may be some issues on the high end trying to incent that, but if people start building them and those second, third floor conversions of downtown commercial buildings, where you can put a couple apartments, those are often done high end and do very, very well. But you have buildings in the downtown where the office space has been sitting vacant for a long, long time. And those are great opportunities, whether it's in Elmira, Corning, again, you do have smaller buildings in some of the outlying communities. That's the perfect place to start thinking about trying to put in some owned housing.
Or they might be vacant, or they might be just marginally utilized.
Right.
And that is a situation where you then have to work with those organizations to say, is there an opportunity for these three groups that are using the space a few days a week to work together or find a new location so that the place could be put to better use for housing?
Yeah. Sioux City, Iowa, by the way, is a community that has done a phenomenal job of converting. They had a lot of vacant upper floors and some historic buildings, some built in the 1980s, but they began converting those to residential, and they have the developers there will tell you they're selling out just about as fast as they can build them, and that's been going on for a decade or more. Victoria, you're muted.
Yes. Would it be appropriate to let the people who've asked some questions in the chat box speak their questions if they'd like? We can start with Albert. You could unmute yourself and ask your question if you're interested.
I haven't any questions. I did want to just mention that it might be good for our planning board to have a collection of the housing and zoning use cases, such as you were talking about, Michael. It's a little tough to it can be a little tough to have context for development when the only context you have is the context you've got.
Were you able
I see
to
it.
look
I
at
saw
some of
another
the report details, Albert?
I'm sorry, you both sound great, but it's hard to make out what you say at the same time.
Go ahead, Victoria.
We sent a link to the housing report that has there's some recommendations on the first few pages that I would hope that if you have some commonalities between these suggestions and what your community can do, we can reach out and talk about those specifics.
That might be. I wanted to attend to the conversation, so although I'm going to capture the links by capturing the notes from the call, I did not look at them yet.
It's in the email invitation that all of this started from.
Okay.
So
And Albert, too, I responded to your chat, a comment, and I sort of said something fairly similar. Getting the industry experts about what people want is really key. I've also included the latest Zonda report. That used to be Myers Research in the chat, a link, as well as the most recent National Association of Realtors and the most recent National Home Builders. Kind of, really good research on, from a nationwide perspective, the surveys of the industry and consumer demand and requirements. Of course, COVID throws curveballs at so many things, right? One of the reasons why I believe the housing boomed in 20 and 21 was people needed their home to be more than just their home. It needed to be their workspace and their home, and it needed to be their workspace and their home and their exercise facility, and it needed to be their workspace, their home, exercise facility, and boomeranging kids, and in some cases boomeranging parents. And so larger homes that people could afford it became in vogue. But things will change, and change is the only constant.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. I think that a lot of this is interesting to the extent that you have primary demand driving interest. And I think that primary demand might be a little thin in this area.
Yeah, and I think that might tie a little bit even into one of the other comments here from Stacy. Your comment about short-term rentals in the tourist areas. I think there is some impact from that. I think a greater impact actually is the purchase of homes that are really intended only for the use of the owner's family as a second home. We see more of that than we do actually the use of as a short-term rental. But either way, they take away from what's available, and that limited stock to begin with now is even more limited by the fact that you don't have permanent residents, and that has ripple effects on if people can't find housing in the area, are they moving further away? You're losing your workforce, you're losing your market for retail and dining and other uses. Another thing that's related to this that we hadn't talked about that I stress is extremely damaging to communities is the increasing purchases of homes by whether it's the big international real estate investment trusts, or even on a smaller scale, the local buyers, but converting those entry-level homes now to rental units. Because again, that it makes it more difficult for you to retain that person who's in their 20s and 30s, who is starting out, who wants to, plant their feet and remain in the community. But if they can't afford to live in the community, if they're loosely tied, if they're not able to build equity, it just makes them a little bit more inclined to be footloose and eventually to leave. And with workforce being what it is, the issues around it, retaining those younger people is essential.
And I agree. I think that there's limiting having some limitations to the short-term rentals in many markets is a thing worth doing. I did post, if you're familiar, fractionalized housing. This is Picasso, which is something's in the way here. Let me get rid of this. This is Picasso. This is actually a Zillow company that has coordinated a fractionalized ownership model where, like Michael said, oftentimes people would buy that house and it'd be empty, 300 days a year. In this case, it's a more efficient way to get that sweet crib in Palm Springs where you're 1/8 owner. That's the smallest percentage of ownership they will fractionalize. They'll do half ownership and to 1/8. So it's one tool, and it has worked fairly well.
Should we ask Stacy to ask her question? Stacy, would you like to unmute yourself, or should we ask it on your behalf? Stacy asked about regulating short-term rentals to ensure affordable workforce housing in those tourist areas. have you found that there's resistance among developers to participating in communities that have regulated their short-term rentals? Would they still participate in developing other types of properties?
Yes. So in markets where there has been regulation, it does cut down on the number of accessory dwelling units is what I'm actually seeing most. Because, for example, in Kirkland, Washington, where I was on the Strategic Housing Committee, we studied of the 300 ADUs that have been done, 50% were short-term rentals. That's how they were being used. 50% were being used for longer-term rentals. I'm a big fan of fixing the mix, and I believe limiting short-term rentals is a major key need in those tourist markets where the workforce can't afford to live. They got in Boulder, they got to drive up over the mountain, and in places like in Bellingham, I mentioned where the Seattle money priced out the locals. The locals have to drive from Linden, which is a charming town, but that's a 30-mile drive each way. And it sucks. So I think we can do better. Again, it's the mix. Again, the housing ecosystem, there's one ecosystem. Apartments are related to luxury housing and everything in between. And you've got to have a fairly cognizant understanding of what one policy does and how it impacts. I think homeownership is key. Michael also mentioned labor challenges. We have a new labor supply coming, and it's the people that used to make office space that are no longer building as much office space. That market is seeing a huge drop. And so let's figure out a way to talk to those folks to get them over to this side of the fence to build the residential we need and what we want. Another thing, for example, is I think condos in those secondary markets. Let's say it's a ski resort or it's somewhere, Finger Lakes or somewhere where it's got that high demand on their condos for second homes. Allow the condos to have some short-term rentals. We own a condo with another partner couple in Vancouver, British Columbia, in downtown, where we can rent out our units up to 6 months a year. And so that way, that unit is being used by people and we are generating some revenue, but then we have a right to use it in those other 6 months. And it works really well. That's actually another type of zoning that's really interesting. And, it's kind of more key to larger cities is the first 12 stories are a hotel. The next 8 stories are apartments, and then the top 8 stories are condos. And so we just use the hotel operator to be our landlord, or to handle our rentals while we're not using it. It's do zoning vertically, and we're seeing that a lot in Seattle and other major cities, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. A bad strategy because the big pencil challenge you always have with developers and REITs that fund them or however they're getting their funding is they want to generate the most money. That's their gig. Well, there's safety and diversity. If you're selling 1/3 of your units condos and you're holding on to the other 2/3, when it's time to read out your interest or sell it out or long-term hold, that diversity means you're less prone to market ups and downs.
I would love to hear about any thoughts you have about municipal housing bonds, because you're talking about areas that have developer pressure and profit motive, and that's fantastic. And it absolutely will drive the development of innovative, beautiful, dense housing, but we don't have a lot of that. Are there ways that our communities can work on municipal housing bonds to build, renovate, or operate housing that you've seen successfully done in bigger cities?
Michael, have you studied that?
I can't specifically say what your bonds allow you to do. I have seen cities that have been the developer, or at least the land developer, to create a subdivision with lots that the smaller builders, the people who can afford to do maybe 1 or 2 homes a year, can do something on spec without having to take a lot of risk. other ways, like we talked about, to try to incentivize it to commit to renting a portion of the commercial space in a mixed use development, or enlist your companies to commit to owning some condos. Just techniques that take away the risk, because that's the big thing. And I think the profit is there. When I look at it, I see the profit is there. It's something that is alien to the people who, they've never done anything like this. They're not comfortable experimenting, because they may be putting everything they've worked in the last 20 years on the line to make that project work. So the cities have to find a way to mitigate that risk.
In my experience, I've seen a lot of use of tax increment financing or tax increment districts, right? TIDS and TIF have been a major tool in Madison. It's like the go-to tool. It's been a little overdone in some cases, because what happens is if in a marketplace, while it's hot, you throw in that public subsidy, it elevates the cost of land so much that projects that you need to fill an affordable component that existing landowner wants a lot more money, because, hey, just next door, my appraiser says my land's worth this because that's what they paid. Well, that project was getting $10 million in TIF, let's say. That has its plus sides and its downsides. I'm a big fan of using that tool where you need to, in areas where there isn't, where you're trying to generate a district development as well. When you're asked the question about your challenges, have you done any placemaking? And Michael's study is part of it. Do you have I recommended take a district that's underdeveloped and create some energy around it with your planners and your AIA group, and say, let's do a visioning process about what we can do here. And then when the city says, well, we're interested in working with developers, it generates some potential activity. I've seen it happen before.
Yeah, I think of all the open, surface level parking outside the Gaffer district. And it's a perfect opportunity. It's in the smaller communities too. I think there are opportunities when you go into a community like Cornell, would be another one I would think of. Elmira is working on it. Elmira has some other challenges, but they're working towards it. And they have a couple more things. They're not quite in the same market position, but they can get there. I think even the small Addison struck me as one of the greatest opportunities you have down there in that region. I think that's just a wonderful opportunity to do some very special development in that area. Not on a big scale, smaller units, but still a very attractive community.
A couple other incentives I've seen successfully used is for accessory dwelling units is one of the LA things, and we try to do this in the Washington State Code, is lower permit fees for accessory dwelling units, so lower that upfront cost. And San Jose, California reserves on Wednesdays ADUs, and you walk out the door with a permit if it's passed. There's not that natural delay. And in Seattle, we developed a pre-approved plans for accessory dwelling units. I worked with 4 of the 7 architects. There are 10 pre-approved plans. So when you walk in to Seattle City Hall and you say, I want to build plan number 9, boom, you walk out the door with your permit. And so time is money. And then at less charge for permitting as well. So there's other different, and I would suggest doing the same for condo development. Again, I would prioritize home ownership. We got apartments covered. The investment groups are buying, and I didn't mention this statistic earlier, 25% of the single family homes being sold in this country this year will be purchased by investors. 10 years ago, it was 4%. And, we need a ton of more single family options, but the investment community has been the big, they've been the big winner with multifamily, and now they're the big winner with single family homes, and they tend to go after the more affordable home price points where we're already lacking inventory.
Yeah, and that disrupts the whole chain, because that's the first home you buy, and then a few years later you sell it and you buy something better, and you move up the ladder. but they can't get up the first rung.
Yeah.
I
And that
think that's
churn,
ultimately the challenge we have to deal with is those investor purchases of single family homes.
exactly. The churn, people move every, that own move every, it used to move every 7 or 8 years. Somewhere in there was almost always the statistic. They churned every 7 or 8 years. That churn is now double that is what is being projected, twice as much. And that churn means less inventory, which means drives up demand, which drives up prices, which keeps people in rentals. And that's not working well, because I always look at the gap. If that household is spending 32% of their income on housing and they used to spend 14%, that 18% is a big economic number. And then on top of that, if we sell 4.4 million homes in 23 and we sold 6.2 in 21, the estimated economic generated is $315 billion in lost economic activity. And that's a big number.
Okay. Does anybody else have questions that they'd like to add in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask now? Okay, so I think we might be done. Thank you so very much. We appreciate all the time that you're able to spend with us today. It's very insightful. Love the graphics.
Those are cool projects. Both of these are great projects. I'm trying to sell them here, get developers interested. I look forward to being out there. My wife and I are taking a Northeast trip next summer. So Victoria, we'll hang out with you.
Yes, come join us. The Wine Country on Market Street is fantastic.
Oh, fun. Cooperstown, Trevor's in Cooperstown. We went there on our honeymoon. I'm a big baseball fan, so we had a great time.
There are a couple people whose emails I'm not sure if I have. Christine Foster, if you're still on the line, if you could jump in the chat and let me know your email. Alex Schultz, Jamie Potts, a person who calls themselves Amy, and I have one registered Amy, but I don't have a last name to match that to. And then William, there's a person sitting with you. If you could put in the chat box their name so I can generate a certificate of attendance. And Brad, I don't have an email address for you as well. So if you want to email me to clear this up or put it in the chat, that'd be great. Thanks so much.
And I put my email in the chat too, just now.
Okay, and I'll email everybody your PowerPoint here for their use.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.